Unit 6, Period 6, The Gilded Age, Section 2 discusses the growth of big business. Today, we're going to talk about railroads and the development of railroads and how important they were after the Civil War. Um, they've become the most valuable industry in America, where in other industries, monopolies and trusts were formed. This was more difficult in the railroad industry because railroads typically did not compete against each other. They were too expensive of an industry to develop to compete. So men came to dominate certain sections of the country. And so you've got multiple men making hundreds and millions of dollars leading these railroad companies across the United States. Here's a map to show you just how important railroads have become. Of course, this is the first transcontinental railroad here in black. Then you can see all the other railroads, most of them back in the east, and of course the time zones that were developed: Eastern, Central, Mountain, and Pacific, mainly because to standardize the travel by Americans on these trains. The Transcontinental Railroad, the first one, was built across the country and connected at a place called Promontory Point, Utah. This is a picture taken of Leland Stanford and Ulysses S. Grant shaking hands as a golden spike is driven into the rails to symbolically connect the two railroads together. The first transcontinental railroad was made up of the Union Pacific, shown here in blue, and the Central Pacific, shown here in red. This transcontinental railroad was successful for the United States because it connected farmers out in the West with industries back in the East and vice versa. So food was able to be transported back into the East, and cows and things like that, whereas industrial products were able to be traded out West with the farmers. This picture here does a pretty good job of illustrating trains coming in and dropping off raw products to the factories producing them and sending them back out west, or trading them with foreign countries by water. How were the railroads built? The western end of the Transcontinental Railroad was built by the Chinese. The eastern end of the railroad, the Union Pacific part of the Transcontinental Railroad, was built by the Irish. Both groups faced what's known as nativism in the United States. Nativism is defined as a fear or hatred of foreigners. Then the question begs to differ: why? Well, nativism usually occurs because one group does not understand the culture of another. In the case of the Chinese, the type of clothes they wore, the color of their skin, the religion that they practiced, the type of food they ate, and probably most important, they were willing to work for very cheap wages. The same could be said of the Irish, except for one factor: the Irish were white. So why were they persecuted? Their main reason for persecution was their religion. Their religion was Catholic. And if you remember the formation of our country, in New England, Puritans and Pilgrims came here because of religious persecution. Well, religious persecution by who? Well, the Catholics in England. So many of the people living in the United States were prejudiced towards Catholics. And so with the Irish, that's why they were mainly persecuted. Probably the worst group to be persecuted in our country's history were the Chinese, from the standpoint that they're the only immigrant group to ever be stopped from migrating to the United States. This is a political cartoon showing Uncle Sam, the symbol of our country, trying to hold a door up to keep the Chinese out of our country. This is another reason why the Chinese were persecuted. Is these are Chinese running one of their stores out west, and they would sell items that made people in America curious. Herbs with medicinal properties, parts of animals that supposedly would cure sicknesses and things like that. And people found this strange. And when humans find things strange, they typically are more likely to persecute the group that believes in that. This is a group of the Chinese, most of it was Chinese men that immigrated to the United States. They were willing to work for cheap rates. They lived very poor lives here while they were in the United States. And eventually, because of pressure by the American public, Congress passed a law called the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882. This political cartoon here demonstrates the idea that a figurative wall was built, a symbolic wall was built to stop the Chinese from coming into our country. This act was not rescinded until World War II. In the middle of World War II, Congress rescinded this act, and Chinese once again were allowed to immigrate to our country.